I was 14 years old and lived in central Louisiana at the time. I lived in a mobile home park, which was on a 2-lane highway. Highway 28, east to be exact. It was a long street with a cul-de-sac type of dead end. At the dead end to the left was the only brick home in the park. Straight ahead was thin woods and several trails going off in every direction. To the right slightly was a deep ditch that people had dumped junk and trash in, like old washing machines, broken laundry baskets, or what have you. A thin metal wire fence ran from the ditch across and into the woods and out of sight. The kids in the neighborhood had what we called a club, where we would all gather to hang out. Some of us had gathered busted or discarded dining room chairs and placed them in the center of what was the thinnest area of trees. I had come there to figure out where to put everything. Beyond the deep ditch further into the woods was a small stream with hills on each side. An enormous old oak tree had fallen beside the stream on the side it was on. I spotted an old metal folding table near the stream and went down to inspect it. I thought it would be a good item to put in the center of the chairs. It seemed to be in good condition, so I decided to head home. I figured I'd get it the next morning. The next morning, I made my way toward the metal wire fence, which somehow had been bent on both its top and bottom inwards toward the center of the fence. I was about to duck under it when I heard the distinct sound of sniffing, so I turned to see what it was. Standing on the other side of the stream was a 7 to 8 foot tall creature sniffing the air. Its head was turned slightly. It stood on 2 powerfully built muscular legs which ended in enormous paws. It had no tail. It had a massive chest as well as extremely muscular arms and hands. The hands seemed to have the same kind of pads that a paw has, but they were arranged differently. It had a wolf-like head and tall pointed ears. The eyes glowed red. The ears were in proportion to the head. It had a snout or muzzle. It kept sniffing the air as it stepped over the large tree trunk like it was nothing. I would have had to physically climb it to get over. I thought it was coming after me. It stopped and seemed to be breathing or panting, but there was this deep rumble that accompanied it. I decided to get out of there before it saw me and ducked up under the fence. I ran to my bike, which was parked off the road, and pedaled my butt home. I never went into those woods again after that.
In October 1972, my husband, our 2 babies, my brother, and I left Leavenworth, Kansas in our 1968 Volkswagen van on a camping trip to a recreational area in Arkansas called Beaver Lake. When we finally got there, we found a fairly remote campsite at the far end of the park. We wanted to be alone as the babies often woke during the night and needed to feed. We didn't want to disturb any other campers. Shortly after pulling into our campsite, my brother pitched his tent next to the van. The rest of us were going to sleep in the van. The campsite was in an area with a horseshoe-shaped rocky terraced ledge that rose from around 50 to 100 feet as it curved around behind the 4 campsites. Because of mature trees and thick brush, daylight had trouble poking into our spot. Fast forward to that night. Sometime around 3:30 a.m. I heard some animal sounds on the ridge that I thought were being made by coyotes. The babies were asleep and all was quiet otherwise. I peered out the window but couldn't see what was making the sounds because it was so dark. Still hearing odd yips and howls, I laid back down. Moments later, there was a huge crashing bang on the van wall right next to my head. My husband jumped out of a full sleep. My brother bolted out of his tent and jumped into the van with us. We were all in a panic, looking in every direction, trying to see what had hit the van like that. My brother finally yelled that he saw something moving behind the van. We all turned just in time to see a large shadow moving about 20 feet behind the van from left to right. After about 20 minutes had passed without any of us seeing movement out there, my husband and brother went out to inspect the van for damage but found none. We then heard pounding steps coming from the brush about 50 feet behind us. The guys eased back into the front seat of the van. That's when my husband turned on the headlights and stepped on the brake pedal for rear light. Instantly, there was a huge commotion. He started the engine, and that's when, in the glow from the headlights, we could see a hairy thing 10 feet away and coming toward the van. As it got closer, its silver-tipped hairs glistened in the light. It had a grayish streak from its shoulders down its back and down to its buttocks. The creature was walking on two legs, was around 7 or 8 feet tall, had a barrel chest and skinny legs. It never gave us a good view of its eyes, so I can't tell you what they look like. I could, however, see that the face was not ape-like. It was dog-like, its ears had tufts of fur on top of them, and it was very human-like in its movements and general body structure. It moved smoothly and quickly around to the back of the van where it followed the base of the ridge away from us. That's when it let out a menacing huff and a low rumbling growl much like a dog. Insanely, my husband and brother bolted from the van trying to get a better look, and that's when a shower of gravel came at us. My husband and brother tore back into the van and burned up the road, getting us out of there. I kept looking out the back window, and they looked in the rearview mirrors, but none of us ever saw it again. It just didn't seem like a Sasquatch was what we had seen. It seemed too dog-like in its face and was too slim in its body. I still have nightmares about the Dogman.
We have had 3 Dogman sightings in the same place, at a house almost directly across from the Wesley Cemetery, on Highway 74 in the Wesley community. All 3 sightings were from our car at night, driving home. The first night we were on our way home from Fayetteville, and it was about 11 or 11:30 at night. We were just talking and having a normal trip home. We both became silent as we passed the White House across from the cemetery. I was driving and I saw something huge run across the porch and jump off the end of the porch and do like a barrel roll, then stand up and run across the field. Everything was so fast, all I did was squeeze the steering wheel and take my foot off the gas. Then I floored it. We looked around and finally, I said, "Did you see that?" My husband said yes. "What the hell was that?" I replied that I wasn't going to go back to find out. I avoided driving Highway 74 after that for quite a while. After a year or more, we were coming home and tired, so we took 74 again because it's much shorter than the other route home from Fayetteville. Right when we get to the same house, a huge thing ran across the road on 2 legs, rolled into the ditch, and then galloped off on all 4s. I was like, never again. So of course after a few months I drove that way again. Nothing for quite a few trips. Then after a late movie, it was well after midnight, maybe 1:30, we passed the house and something huge ran up the side of the road and stood there with its shoulders moving like it was breathing heavy. All 3 times, we both felt like it wanted us to look at it, but we refused to turn our heads, so it was all side glances, except when it ran across the road right in front of us. It was big enough that when it was on the porch, it was hunched over and had to go on its hands and feet to jump off the end of the porch. Its hair was sparse, thicker on the back, and shoulders' ears were pointy, and laid back huge, toothy grin like a German shepherd that's been at play. I was watching the rear view expecting to see it coming after us. The area is dark, but there is a night watchman in the yard of the White House and at the cemetery, as well as the headlights of our vehicle. The first sighting was on or near a full moon because it was very bright out and the porch light was on. The second and third were maybe half moon, not nearly as bright. All 3 sightings were in the winter or very early spring, no foliage. These all took place between 1999 and 2000. The weird thing is that the White House is a rental. It never stayed rented for more than 2 or 3 months. Then we would see people moving out and new ones moving in. If anyone had an outside dog, it never lasted long. Now the house has been for sale for at least 10 years, and no one is interested. No one keeps cattle down in that valley at all, either, which is strange. It's very green, lush pasture that sits empty. We've driven home that way at night a few times since it's been empty and haven't seen a thing. Not that either of us want to.
I was traveling Highway 10 from the west coast to the south coast of Florida. I was with my 6 kids and pulling a trailer with all of my belongings and 3 dogs in it. I was in a big sport utility vehicle, and it was around 2 a.m. The kids were all asleep, and my 13-year-old daughter was in the passenger seat to make sure I stayed awake. So after traveling Highway 10 for 3 days, I had decided since we reached Florida, we would cut through the state to save some time. So we got off Highway 10 on an off-road in hopes of getting gas and making up some time. It was along Route 27 near Apalachicola National Forest. We came to the first little gas station. It was closed. I was nervous because we needed gas, so we continued on. I told my daughter to keep an eye out for deer crossing the deserted 2-lane highway, because hitting a deer could kill us all and turn us over due to the trailer we were pulling. We were traveling around 45 miles per hour. We had our brights on because the road was dark and winding. A few houses were on that highway, but not many. As we came around a corner, we saw in the headlights there was a lot of blood on the road, fresh blood, and on the side of the road was this 6 or 7 foot tall creature. It was on its hind legs, hunched over a dead deer, eating it. It did not look up, not even when my headlights hit it. It was using its arms like a human eating the deer. It had a very muscular body, pointed ears, and a long muzzle. It had a skinnier lower body, but used its arms and hands just like a human. We sped off because I was scared it would run and jump on the trailer and kill my dogs. As we got about a mile away, my heart was beating so hard. My daughter and I were so freaked out.
One night I had been stuck in heavy traffic coming home, and I really had to go to the bathroom. I kept telling myself that I was almost home and tried to hold it until I got there. By the time I got to my exit, I knew I wasn't going to make it to my house, so I pulled up to where Fidelity Investments is located and found an area that was isolated. This area is heavily wooded with walking trails and a lot of game, but it is also in a very populated area. I pulled up a little side drive off one of the main roads. That little drive is about 100 feet long with only room for one car. It went up in elevation and had bushes on the right side facing the main road. On the left side, there was a guardrail and a view of the valley below. The area up there is huge and isolated with several buildings that are all spaced out. The place is dark at night because there are intermittent street lights up there. At night, it's pretty deserted too. A few cars go through that area though because it's a shortcut people use to go from Taylor Mill over to Thriel Highway where there are stores, restaurants, and such. When you're up there, you're above everything around this area. When I stopped, I got out of my car, waited a moment, and looked around to make sure there were no other cars. It was winter, so the bushes between where I was and the road below me didn't have many leaves on them. Because of that, you could see right through them. I was up on this little rise about 20 or 30 feet above the drive. To the left of me was a streetlight and more woods that went down another hill to the main road. I went to the back of my car and did what I had to do. When I finished, I stood up, and all at once every hair on my body stood up. I knew I wasn't alone. I scanned the area in front of me and must have heard something behind me because I turned around and there were 3 deer standing there all huddled up together between my car and the guardrail. They weren't looking at me. They were looking across the road. I looked back over there, and that was when I saw a figure standing between the bushes in front of it and the tree line behind it. It was huge. I stand 5'5". Some of those bushes were about 6 feet tall, but they only came up to about the collarbone on this thing. From the streetlight to the right of it, about 20 feet away, I was able to get a pretty clean outline of this thing. It had a large dog-shaped head and pointed ears. I couldn't make out its neck, but I could make out its massive shoulders. That's when it growled. It was a deep vibration I could feel in my chest. My body just took over at that point. I have to explain this part of it to you. I worked security for years in the music business. As a woman, I have to really work out and train to defend myself. I kickboxed for 8 years and worked out every day. I also trained dogs, mainly Anatolian shepherds and German shepherds. Sometimes I have to establish who is the alpha, and to do that I get them down, hold them in place, grab them by their ear and growl until they submit. Then the training can start. So when this thing growled at me, it was just pure instinct. I dropped down to a crouching position and growled right back at it. When I did that, it stopped growling and started sniffing the air. Its snout went up and it turned its head slightly as it was sniffing. It then took a few steps forward. I was still crouched down on all fours and moved forward, still growling at the thing. When I did that, it stopped. I stood up and kept staring right at it. I never broke eye contact with it. Then it slowly stepped back into the tree line until I couldn't make it out as clearly as before and started to move to the right of me. The deer were still behind me. They were so close I could have reached out and touched them. I waved my arms and told them to get out of there. When I did that, they went back over the guardrail and took off down the hill. That's when I jumped in my car and got out of there as fast as I could. I felt this thing was trying to circle behind me, and I wasn't going to wait around for that. Do I think I scared it? No, but I do think I confused it for a couple of minutes, and that gave me time to move. I told my husband about what had happened up there, but I didn't tell him exactly what I saw. He would think I was nuts, and to be honest, I thought I was a little crazy myself, until I saw a picture of a Dogman. I know there are other things in this world that can't be explained. I've seen them, but this was beyond any of those things. Since this has happened, I can't take that shortcut through that area anymore. My husband took me back over that way once to see the area, and I was begging him to get me out of there the whole time. I thought I was going to throw up. The wildlife up there has almost totally disappeared. I never see anything up on the hills anymore. The street I live on is only about 1 mile or so down the hill from this place, and lately we have seen coyotes on the streets, like they have been chased out and pets here have started to go missing. We've also seen a large, black figure moving through our backyards down here. The dogs throughout the neighborhood go crazy regularly now, too. People were calling the cops when we saw that large black figure jumping fences. I'm concerned that it has come down the hill after eating everything up there.